On this episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Isn't not knowing just the most awful thing? Aren't we safer when we do know? Isn't it a catastrophe, like catastrophizing and here, when we don't know? Today we'll talk about the psychology of not knowing and what we call opening loops and closing loops. That's next, the psychology of not knowing.
Welcome to Therapy Bites Art Lab, where Dr. Heath and his special guests share real-life stories of helping and healing, fresh from the actual therapy couch, while taking a bite out of common counseling missteps and misconceptions. And now, here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
Hey guys, opening and closing loops. The human brain goes through life trying to figure things out. And when we can't figure things out, we perceive that as dangerous to us or even catastrophic to us. Today in the Art Lab, and by the way, that stands for Accurate Realistic Thinking, Life Affirming Beliefs, the Art Lab. Today in the Art Lab, we're talking about that. Is it really dangerous not to know? Can what you don't know hurt you? And we have our brave psychotherapy adventures with us today as I'm scratching my nose. You know, itches are an open loop. Your brain begs you to scratch that itch. And today it's all about, you know, those psychological itches, and we want to scratch them. And we have our I started to say our worm girl, but she's kind of wormy. We're trying to fix that. Our bookworm, Sarah, our gamer girl, Heather, and it is Squirrel girl, Debbie. That's right here in the Art Lab. How are you guys with having those dangling questions, things that you just don't know? They kind of beg for an answer. Those are tough.
They are tough, and I have struggled with a lot of them a lot of times, because it seems like there's a lot of times we just want answers. We just want to know, why did this happen? Why did that happen? And one of the things that I've found to be a little bit helpful for me with some of these things is looking for meaning to determine, you know, what meaning can I get from this? I'll look for meaning and what's the healthiest way I can look at this that'll serve me the best as I look at this in the future.
Yeah, what's one of the hardest things that you've run into as to figuring out what is the meaning of this? And that's my question number one. Maybe a hard situation. The second is, where do you think that meaning comes from? Do you think that the meaning is implicitly, it's just part of the makeup of the situation? It's kind of like digging a diamond out of the situation, or is it more of it's an empty canvas? It's a blank chalkboard, and any meaning, you're going to have to write it on there. I mean, what do you guys think?
I think, perspective has to do a lot with it, So I would take more of the approach of kind of an empty canvas, and I get to decide whatever meaning I'm going to give to it. Because, if you have multiple people go through the same thing, they're going to react to it in different ways. And a lot of it has to do with how they're thinking about it. The perspective that they're choosing. If I sound a little bit scratchy today, I've got some allergies going on, so. But how they're choosing to respond to it, perspective, all that kind of stuff. That's kind of my perspective on it.
She's like a vintage vinyl record, all scratching stuff.
Yes.
I actually have a phonograph. Points to anybody out there listening that actually knows what a phonograph is. Extra points if you own a phonograph. Put it in the comments. I'd love to meet some fellow phonograph owners. I bought one, and a friend of mine that kind of installed it, he finally got it done. We tested out a record on it, and his name's Dusty. Hey, shout out to Dusty. He's an interesting guy. And he turned it on, and he said, well, there you go. It's all crappy and scratchy and stuff. Yeah. He's young. He doesn't believe in phonograph. It's all electronics. But Sarah's our resident scratchy phonograph today. I think that's very interesting what Sarah just said, because it's been my experience, people don't believe that at all. People do not believe that they have the power, or maybe you might call it the responsibility, response able the ability to respond to a situation and actually engrave your own meaning upon it. I think that what people do normally out there in the world is they actually think meaning is part of the situation, that it comes fully engraved on the meteor that just went through your roof. And what you should be able to do in life is pick up the meteor and it says, I came through your roof to you for this reason. I don't think they think that way at all. And I think, by the way, that's a problem. I mean, take, for instance, dream interpretation.
Yes.
People have dreams, and there are books on dreams. And, Sigmund Freud was famous for his dream work, and Carl Jung, but maybe to a lesser extent. And people would come to Freud, and he was very, very deterministic about it, that this meant this and that meant that. And I have patients, several recently, who said, well, I went to a dream analysis and they told me my dream meant this, and I really kind of shirk at that. Well, how the crap would they know? Were they, I mean, was it like a Hollywood production? What's the movie called? With Leonardo DiCaprio, Inception. My favorite movie is Inception. Were they part of the dream with you? I mean, how would they know? My position is that, and I think if you think about it, you'll come to agree, that every situation comes to us, as Sarah said, as a blank canvas. Now, there's lots going on.
Right.
You may be dreaming of running from the Thanksgiving turkey or something, and it's going to beat you in the head with one of its drumsticks, and I have an active imagination. But what does that mean? Well, it may mean several things. Just real quick, and we can do a whole episode on dream analysis, but dreams, anybody out there, here's some extra points again for Gryffindor. If you can come up with what do you think dreams are for? Well, the biggest things that dreams are for is they are circuit testing in the brain. Here's some neuroscience. Imagine that your brain has wall switches, and to keep those connections healthy, your brain is flipping and flipping those circuits on and off, on and off, on and off, just as a circuit testing, health testing activity. And that best happens not while you're driving down the road at 65 miles an hour, by the way. It happens when you're safely in your bed asleep during dreams. It is circuit testing. Another thing, and the second biggest, is encoding. You dream so that your brain could leverage the use of tool words and symbols, pictures or graphics, little PNGs in your brain, in order to encode memories of, well, what's the molecular weight of dimethyl sulfoxide, for instance? Does anybody know that? It's below 500, by the way, because it helps you absorb stuff through your skin. See, you may dream about that. The Thanksgiving turkey being absorbed through your skin because it is slathered in DMSO, whose weight is below 500, of course, molecular weight. Well, your brain dreams and images to assist in encoding. One of the best times to study kiddos out there, my son being one of them, although he wouldn't want me calling him a kiddo, would he? But he'll always be my kiddo, is studying before bed is one of the best ways to encode that information. The third thing is that through the circuit testing, it's just random nonsense. Your brain doesn't have to process things with meaning to do the circuit testing. It just circuit tests it. I mean, it's like the lorem ipsum of websites. It doesn't have to be understandable language. It can just be gibberish because it's just kind of a placeholder, and your brain dreams in non-understandable gibberish because it is a circuit test. Why would you expect for that to mean something? It's like reading the lorem ipsum of a website, all that placeholder text, and thinking, oh gosh, what does that mean? Well, why has it got to mean anything? But the open loop, we are programmed to think that everything means something, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. And the final thing, probably not the final thing, there's probably more things, is it's something that you're worried about. It's something that you're just concerned about, and your brain works out solutions while you're sleeping. And not to make this a whole podcast about dreams, but dreams are an open loop, as are nightmares, which are really just dreams that we think are scary. The one more thing I talked about, and no offense to anybody, but Yes, sometimes, based on my personal belief, I do think that the Creator, God, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, the universe, whatever, I refer to as God, has communicated to people through dreams. Be very, very careful with that, because that can result in a false positive. Just because you dream in whatever voice you want to put God's voice, that you should go strip naked, paint your body purple, run down the interstate, I'd be very careful thinking that's a message from God to do so. it should really kind of fit nicely and neatly with everything else that you know about God and what God wants you to do and not want you to do. That can be very dangerous territory. Those are 5 open loops, and within dreams, the big open loop. What are some other open loops that you found people running into? Unanswered questions.
Well, one thing, to go back a little bit, when we were talking about the blank canvas versus the diamond, the diamond in the rough, my interpretation of that has always been, the difficult things in my life. I have a blank canvas that I can write on. The diamonds are the meaning that I dig deep for, and the meaning that I find in, as I'm painting the canvas, as I'm putting the things on there.
And the diamonds are where? Where are the diamonds located? Where do they come from? Did they come from the event? Do they come from others' perceptions of the event?
Probably my perception.
Your
of the
perceptions
event.
of the
my
event.
My perception of the event.
Mm-hmm.
How I choose to perceive it and think about it.
The diamonds are actually in the vault of your skull, as we
Yes.
say, or as my old neuropsychology professor would say. I borrowed that from him. Elkanah Goldberg. Shout out Dr. Goldberg, New York, downtown. Yes, I agree. What about you ladies? Heather, you agree? You find these diamonds of meaning somewhere buried in the depths of your implicit processing?
Yeah, and I think too, where some people I've heard some people get strung up is trying to focus too much on those diamonds and underthinking the situation, because they're focused on, well, I've got to figure out what this diamond is and really unearth it and get it cleaned up and really look at it, when sometimes the diamond isn't what you need to be focusing on. You need to be just focusing on the curiosity of the situation, or sometimes that loop doesn't need to be closed necessarily because it's not what you need to be focusing on, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, because we do think that an open loop, an unanswered question, an incompleted jigsaw puzzle in life, some incomplete pattern, something we don't understand, we perceive that as a threat to us. Now, that's not all bad. That's not all bad. If you walk in to your home after being at the Halloween party, which is now when you're seeing this last month, and the door's ajar, and you just heard a scary ghost story, and your house is dark, the door is ajar as they approach the front porch step. Well, that's an open loop. Now, that's not a bad thing, because, gosh, I think that a little bit of caution, a lot of caution is merited. Maybe you need to call 911, have the police come and, clear your home and make sure you're safe. Or if you have a faulty door latch, well, maybe the simplest explanation is the best one, and it's just that. Or you remember that Junior or Sally Sue, whoever, left the door ajar, then that might explain it. Still caution. But we react adversely to open loops, unanswered questions, pattern changes to keep us safe. But if it's a false positive, as Heather pointed out, we become hyper-focused on that to the expense of other things, and we underthink. Well, what are some things that you commonly find people underthinking in your work as clinicians? And, of course, we always keep it confidential. We don't use names or specifics. But just in general, what are some things that you find people ignoring and underthinking?
I mean, anxiety is a big one. So they'll just be so focused on the anxiety itself, just feeling anxiety, that they'll completely ignore what they're telling themselves about the situation. And, you know, they're like, well, if I'm anxious, then something has to be wrong, right? Something's going to go wrong, you know, all that kind of stuff. It's like, no, that doesn't mean something's going to go wrong. It just means, you know, maybe you're just feeling some anxiety. Maybe you're telling yourself something that's not actually there.
This podcast is HIPAA compliant. No identifying patient information will be disclosed without permission from patients or guardians. All personal stories will be de-identified in order to comply with HIPAA, the NASW Code of Ethics, and the ethical principles of psychologists and Code of Conduct.
That's right, fresh from the therapy couch, we like to bring you real life stories, and lately I've had a lot of patients ask me about forgiveness. And forgiveness sometimes presupposes that we must know how the future is going to work out. How can I forgive someone if I don't know that they won't do something in the future that is hurtful or harmful to me? Well, if you make that part of forgiveness, you'll never forgive because you'll never have the ability to know the future. Best to see forgiveness not as based in proof, but as something that is a gift, something that cannot be earned, something that must be given. And forgiving is as freeing to you as it is to the person that is forgiving. I have a YouTube video that I encourage you to check out over at our YouTube channel, Therapy Bites Art Lab. It's all on forgiveness. It's a Father's Day video, but it also relates to forgiveness in a general way with all relationships, because forgiveness is not what you think it is. Forgiveness is not about knowing the future. Forgiveness is about making a decision in the present, here, and now.
You're listening to Therapy Bites Art Lab, bite-sized therapy for your brain with Dr. Heath and the T-Ball team. The best advice on the net. No copay required.
From the dark recesses beneath the therapy couch, we're bringing you today the secret psychological disorder of, well, this week. And it's xenophobia. That goes along with our episode today, because xeno is a Greek word for stranger or related to not knowing someone, but it can be broader than that. It can be not knowing most anything. And in today's world, we run into that because we perceive that not knowing a person of a different race or a different color or a different persuasion or different belief system or different choice system is unsafe for us. And that's not so. That's not so. It should be based more on evidence. What evidence do we have that this person who is different from us is more of a threat than a benefit? I think we'll see if we will allow ourselves to get to know other people who look different, talk different. My goodness, don't I speak differently than you do probably, because I'm from the South, a very particular part of the South that just tends to speak this way. I'm a transplant of Nashville, Tennessee and Northeast Arkansas, and you blend those together, well guys, this is what you get. But though this is different from you, this does not mean it is a threat to you. It is just a different way of speaking. I challenge you to expose yourself to as many different people as possible. Believe you me, it will embiggen your brain. Thanks for joining us.
Here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
Where there's smoke, there must be fire.
Yeah, right.
Sometimes there can be smoke and there's no fire. My toast was smoking last night. There was no fire, but it was burnt toast. But all was okay. Yes, people get to where they catastrophize anxiety. They hyper-focus on the emotion and forget to live their life. They don't radically accept the anxiety, and they let that get in the way of relationships and moving forward and doing their cardio and eating properly and going to work and going out and just living in the moment. Yes, they drastic underthinking. What are some other ways that open loops people tend to let those sabotage them, unanswered questions?
I think grief.
Grief,
like
in
loss,
what way?
Like losing someone, trying to figure out why that person, especially if it's like a child, why they were taken so soon, and or even older people, like why did they have to go, or if I know I think we've maybe mentioned it, but like combat veterans, like with losing a fellow soldier, soul.
Why were they killed and I wasn't? People tend to think there must be some grand plan for this person to have died and not me. Because if there's not a grand plan, then I'm not safe. And a little bit of a spoiler alert here, and room for a good debate. I love debate, but here it is. Assuming that there must be some grand plan, which usually winds up in people saying, God chose for the child to die. God chose for my loved one to die, for my best pal or buddy to die, is to miss a lot. And that is that in the very engineering of creation is infinite variation and free will. Therefore, and this is one of those things we could do a whole show on, therefore, if there is infinite variation, which as a part of that is free will, then that means God can't engineer this stuff, because to do so, he would have to rob you of your free will. Your free will to have taken that drive. Your free will to not have taken that drive. Your free will to join up in the military, to either take an assignment or not take an assignment. Your free will to stay in the military or not. I mean, for God to decide where you live. New Orleans, they tend to have hurricanes. Obviously, Hurricane Katrina years ago. California tends to have earthquakes. Well, you have to have free will to either move there, live there, stay living there, and to do so, you expose yourself to things. Where we live, we don't have a lot of earthquakes. We do have tornadoes.
Oh, yes.
But to be able to blame everything, all these things on God, to close the loop by just saying God did it, or heck, I don't know, maybe the devil did it, is to presuppose that you have no free will. To have lived otherwise, done otherwise, chosen otherwise, been another place, stayed in this place, went to that place, been with this person, chosen not to be with that person, but the other person. Nope, God just did it. I disagree. 3 times over. That is sacrificing your free will. The open loop that is often closed with God did it just gives God a bad name. You know, God is somewhat heavenly hit man or hit person. He's just knocking people off left and right. I think it was in Silence of the Lambs where Hannibal Lecter uses this when he says that God, I think I got my movies right, God dropped a roof on 40 or 50 of his own worshipers. Yeah, because God just does that stuff. He's actually like a celestial wrecking ball. Or is it that, you know, we have buildings and we have gravity and we have the whole weight of the planet pulling on the roof, and if the roof is not sturdy and if the roof is not checked and the roof is not maintained, well, those things tend to cave in. If you throw a rock in the air, if you put things up high, those things sometimes tend to fall, but that's because of, I don't know, gravity. Not necessarily that God did it. But the loop is often closed, and God tends to be pointed out as the author and the mover, the great mover of that. And I would just disagree. That really goes against any kind of variety or infinite variation or free will. Thoughts on that or other parts of the open and closing loops? What else do you see people struggle with?
I think sometimes too with finding, because like you said, you know, like when you have an itch, you want to scratch it. When you have that open loop, sometimes without realizing it, I think saying, well, it was a, you know, divine, you know, intervention, or like that God did it. It's just kind of closing that loop quick, so that way people don't have to think about it. It's just like an easy, I don't want to say, what's the word I'm looking for?
Is it almost like avoidance?
Yeah,
Is that what you're
that's what.
thinking?
Yeah, like it's an avoidance, it's something, so they don't have to think about it or leave it open or think about like, well, maybe I'm the one at fault for something if it's not if it's something that they do have control over. Maybe instead of accepting that responsibility, it puts the responsibility on someone else.
Exactly. And what disorder? Little pop quiz here. What personality disorder do you find a similar train of thinking? Starts with a B.
That's what I was
Yeah.
thinking.
Borderline.
Because
Borderline.
it's the I love you, I hate you syndrome,
Right.
where people are already thinking, you're going to kick me out, you're going to fire me, you're going to leave me. I would just rather get it over with.
Kind of that self-fulfilling prophecy.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. People, once they're given an answer, even if it's the incorrect one, then all the alarm bells stop going off, because then they can get about the work of coping with whatever answer they've been given, even if it's the wrong one. Isn't that crazy? Even if it's the inaccurate one.
Right.
We're just engineered for safety to not like open loops and to not know. But I have a bit of a thought experiment, and we have a few more minutes left in the episode, but here's a thought experiment. Imagine that there's a huge wall-sized chalkboard behind you, and you can imagine drawing a huge circle on the chalkboard. The huge circle represents all of the knowledge in the universe. Now, take your piece of chalk and draw a circle inside the larger circle representing all the knowledge you possess. How big would your circle be?
I don't think you could see it.
No, I
You don't
don't
think you
think the
could see
chalk
it.
could make it that small.
Mine also. It would be a
Tiny
dot.
pinhead.
A tiny, tiny dot. I've actually done this with people, and they've drawn a pretty big dot. Actually, not a dot. They've drawn I'll do this on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and the 8.5 and 11 is the large circle. And I've had people that will draw a dot or a circle, and they will say that this, it's I don't know, 25% of the page. Wow, you possess 25% of all the knowledge in the known universe. Blah, 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 blah. I'm on my knees, and this
worthy.
celestial being standing in front of me. If only, but I could
Are
have
they
that much knowledge.
teenagers?
Because the teenagers, yes, it is a teenager.
No, it'd be
Older I get, the
75%
smaller it
if
gets.
it was-
yeah, that's true.
And it's good to realize that it is okay not to know, and lack of knowledge does not equal danger. Lack of knowledge does not equal danger. This is what we deal with when we're talking of death, because people will think that they know what death is, and they will either manufacture a lot of fear about it, or if we're talking about killing oneself, they will presuppose that they have knowledge about death if they do not. Imagine the big circle is death. What would be within that circle all the knowledge you have about death? How big would that be? Well, if you talk to a person that's thinking about killing themselves, they think they know everything about death, and that includes comfort. And that it's the only way, and that it's the best way. Again, with death, I would little bitty tiny dot. No one knows what death really is, because other than the folks who've had an NDE, near-death experience, which those are very debatable. Those are, not as reliable as we think they are, and something else maybe. It's really a trip that no one has taken and been back, but I think maybe 2 people I know of. Was there another one? I think there's only 2, right? And one of them's name is, if you're a follower, is Lazarus, and the other would be, of course, Jesus Christ, and I think that's about it. It's a very small club, and death is the unknown, and people think that the unknown is either very, very safe or very, very unsafe, but that is a type 1 error. You think that you know something that you really don't. Okay, as we wrap up, what are some things that you guys are still struggling with? And our audience, what are some things that you're still struggling with that before today's show you thought that you would be safer if you could only know? If I only knew. Now, I'm going to pick out a couple that I've heard. And while I'm talking, our audience can pick out a couple that they've heard, and my fellow clinicians here can pick out a couple they've heard. But one of the big ones I've heard are people that would say, if I only knew my spouse would never cheat on me again. See, they think that they have to know that to move forward and have a healthy relationship. And then I could relate that to many things, is if I knew I would succeed in college, I would go to college. If I knew that this job would hire me, I would apply. If I knew I would be successful at this pursuit, I would engage in the pursuit. What are they really telling themselves? And what are you really telling yourself? You're really telling yourself that if I don't know, then doing it is unsafe for me. Unless I know the turnout, the conclusion, I won't be safe. I would challenge that, and you should challenge it. You guys, what's something that you struggle with that you've told yourself, gosh, I just got to know?
I think the first thing that actually came to my mind, and not necessarily just with me, but with a lot of people I work with too, but is mind reading. Practicing mind reading, because thinking, well, I just have to know what that other person's thinking. And so instead of just leaving that loop open, we try to close it with whatever we can. And usually it's not a good thing. Usually it's like, well, they're looking at me a certain way, so they're upset with me, or especially with relationships like your spouse or your significant other. I have to know what they're thinking. So I'm going to, even if they tell me what they're thinking, maybe I don't like that answer, so I'm going to engineer something that I prefer or that I don't prefer. And we just can't, I'm going to use a cognitive distortion here. I can't stand not knowing, I can't handle it. It's like, yes, you can. You really can. You'll be okay.
You ladies, something that you struggle with not knowing, that you have to remind yourself it's okay to not know, it's not a threat to me to not know?
I got to think about it a little bit more.
Okay.
I think for me, it's trying new things.
Oh.
Sometimes, because it's like, there's something that maybe I really want to do, but it's like, it's the unknown. It's out of my, circle of like what's normal and what's predictable. And so it's adding a new element. And so, sometimes I'll go ahead and I'll do it, but other times it's like I'll try to come up with excuses of, well, it's not going to work because of this, and this, and so I'll immediately close it down because I know I think it's not safe, and I don't want to do something new because there's no predictability. It's out of that change.
The old "it's not safe" distortion, which we call catastrophizing, and finally, as we clear kind of wind up our show and hopefully have cleared up some distorted thinking, the little spoiler alert thing that I said I would share with you is that no event, situation, circumstance comes to us ready-made with meaning. Meaning is always, always, always transcribed by us onto that little meteor that falls through the roof of our skull into our lives. It is up to us and us only to decide the meaning. And you can decide whatever meaning you want. You can actually decide that I just don't know. I don't know, and that maybe this had no meaning, maybe it just happened. Just because it happens doesn't mean it has meaning. It's okay for things in life, such as I use the example of the gravel in my driveway. Here's a rock pretend it's a rock from the gravel in my driveway. What does this rock mean? Many things, a freaking rock. You can safely decide, I just don't know, that this particular thing may have no meaning, it may have just happened, and there's your daily dose of existentialist philosophy. Catch us next time at the Art Lab. Thanks for being with us today. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Hey everyone, this is Debbie with today's creature feature. Today's creature is the catastrophizing ant. Ant standing for automatic negative thoughts. The catastrophizing ant likes to make everything a level 10 catastrophe. Looks for the worst case scenario. So somebody else not doing what we would prefer them to do? Catastrophe. Things not going the way we think they should. Catastrophe? Nope. These things aren't catastrophes. Don't let these ants spoil your picnic. Instead, let's look to Artie. Accurate, realistic thoughts.
Hey, T-Ballers. Thanks so much for being with us today. If we brought value to your day, show us some love by leaving your positive feedback and inviting some friends to listen in and join the T-Ball team. Next time on Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Hey, T-Ballers, have you ever considered that gratefulness can actually maximize your health? On the next Therapy Bites Art Lab podcast, we're going to talk about how exercising a regular practice of finding things to be grateful for, we call those TFGs, targets for gratefulness, can actually supersize your life and even help you live longer. Join us next.